Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we are going to talk about some deep and difficult topics of methodology. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahu waliyul ladina amanu yukhrijuhum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur والذين كفروا أولياؤهم الطاغوت يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. So as Allah Ta'ala has promised, those people who believe will be led from darkness into light, and those who do not will be led from light into darkness. So even though everybody is hugely impressed by the structure of Western knowledge that they have accumulated over 300 years, Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran that what you have been given as a gift, the Quran, it is much more valuable than anything that they can gather. But today the illusion, the deception of Western wisdom and knowledge has captured our hearts and minds, and so we are unable to see this. So what I'm going to try to show is that they have, in the social sciences, they have made huge numbers of mistakes. In the physical sciences, they have made huge number of advances. When it comes to the outside world, what is the sun and what is physics, they have made tremendous advances. But to what is inside the human heart, that is blind. Now, social science is all about human beings and human societies, and so that is an area where they have completely gone off the track. So there are many major mistakes that have been made in the development of science and scientific methodology in Europe. Famous saying about the elephant and how many people mistook it. So there is a book called What is This Thing Called Science, in which 9 different possibilities are listed, but the truth is not among them. And the author writes, it's a very popular, that we don't know the answer to this question. And the answer is very simple, and in some other lecture I have explained what the answer is and why West has very great difficulty in understanding that answer. So there were 3 major methodological mistakes that were made in the development of social science as we see it today. These mistakes are still there at the foundation of modern economics and of modern econometrics. As a result, both of these disciplines produce models and results which are completely wrong. So econometrics you can use to prove, and in my last lecture I did that the consumption of Pakistan is significantly affected by female life expectancy at survival rate up to age 95, and the carbon dioxide emissions. If you run these as regressors, they will come out significant. So the methodology that is currently taught in econometrics leads to nonsense results. The same is true of economics. The methodology which is taught says that if you play prisoner's dilemma, you should betray the other person because it is in your self-interest. But this is completely wrong. It is not in your self-interest to betray. It is in your self-interest to cooperate. So the ideas that are produced by economic theories are just completely wrong. Now, so the question then arises that how can very intelligent people who can make genetic engineering and really do very, very complex mathematics, and so they can get a rocket ship to the moon, why can't they understand these simple problems? How is it that Robert Lucas, Nobel Prize winner, how he can say that there is no such thing as involuntary unemployment? If somebody is unemployed, a friend was talking to me, he said that, I met a cab driver and he said that, he's a physicist, but he can't get a job. So he says, well, it's his choice, some people are lucky, some are unlucky. So he doesn't count him as involuntarily unemployed. Everybody makes their choices, and some people are unlucky. And similarly, Eugene Fama, another Nobel Prize winner, says that the global financial crisis, there was no bubble in the stock market. And this is just like being blind to reality. So the question is not just that these people are blind, there have always been blind people in the world and have made ridiculous statements, but the question is that how come these people have the respect and honor and standing in economics? How come these people are not driven out? How come people don't laugh at them when they come in as these are crazy kooks who have no idea of what's going on? So that's because there are fundamental defects in the way, the methodology with which economics is done. This methodology decides what is going to be counted as right and what is going to be counted as wrong. And this methodology is very seriously defective. So our object, so there are three major mistakes, and there are many others, but these are three big points that we can pick up. One was that there was a battle of science against religion. Again, I have covered this in other lectures. And in this battle, science won, and the Europeans came to believe that religion is superstition. Now, it is correct that the Catholic religion that they had was superstition, but they came to the jump to the conclusion that all religion is superstition without actually studying any other religion. So then they said that the only reliable, actually it was an emotional shock, a trauma, something they had all believed in turned out to be false. So they said from now on we will only trust in science, and science is all you can see and touch, and anything that is invisible we won't believe in it, because we've already been shocked once, we have been deceived once, and we will not be deceived again by this idea. So then they started heavy emphasis on observables, and basically they said that science is going to be the only reliable source of knowledge for us. Now, this was a great mistake, because there are lots of things that are not accessible to science, like human behavior is not governed by mathematical law, and human behavior has free will. Human beings have free will, so their past does not determine their future. There's no physical law which you can write that this is how the human being is going to behave. But unfortunately, the economic theory model is based on assuming that human beings are robots and they can be programmed to behave in certain ways. The second major mistake that occurred in European history was the Battle of Methodologies, which took place in late 19th century. And in this battle, there were two schools of thought. One was the qualitative and historical school, which is the natural way. I mean, if we talk about how economics, we understand that there's huge numbers of people have different motives, everything is happening at the same time. Obviously, you can't apply simple models and mathematical laws to understand it. It's intuitive and natural, and that's how people used to do things. They studied economics as a branch of history and of moral philosophy, because economics is about justice. Who is getting what? Are the laborers being exploited? Are the capitalists getting more than their fair share? Is this a just price, or is this an exploitative price? All of these moral issues are built into economics. Do we have a responsibility to feed the hungry people? So on. So basically, all of these are central questions at the heart of economics. But when you say that economics is going to be a science, then you say that morality is not part of science, and it cannot become a part of science. This was also discovered very early, that the normative issues, how should I behave? This is a question which science cannot answer. So then this was taken out of the realm of knowledge, and as a result, the West became blind to these issues, and still remains. If you look at economics, they will, the concept of a sub-game perfect strategy is based on the idea that you can make a commitment and then later you don't need to honor it, because rational behavior means that you can make a promise and you can swear that I will do this, but later on, if it's in your self-interest to betray, then you will betray. And that's rational behavior, and that is what human beings are. Both of these, yani, both the normative assumption that is what is good, and the empirical assumption this is how actually human peoples behave. Both of these are made in economics, and both of these are wrong. So the battle of methodologies, the historical and qualitative and moral approach lost to the mathematical, quantitative, and scientific approach. For reasons which, as the Bible says, that the race is not always to the swift, meaning that the right party doesn't always win the race. So here, the truth did not win, the falsehood won. And exactly in the illustration of the ayah, that those who reject God will be misguided, they will be led from light into darkness. And so this is exactly what happened. And the third major hit, which caused massive distortions in the construction of social science today, occurred at the early 20th century when this philosophy of logical positivism came into being. This is a complicated story, and I've explained it in a paper called Logical Positivism and Islamic Economics briefly. But basically, logical positivism was based on the idea that science is based only on observables. Now, this is actually a mistaken idea about science itself. It's very complicated how they came to think this, because science itself has a lot of unobservables like gravity and electrons and electromagnetic forces and lots of things. So how did it happen that so there are two philosophies. One is the realist philosophy, which says there is something real called gravity, and that is what causes attraction. And there's the nominalist philosophy, that gravity is just a name we give to something which we don't know anything about. And actually, we don't really know whether or not such a thing exists. And we don't take any stand on this idea of whether or not something exists. All we do is we say we're using that as a convenient way to describe the orbits which are observable. So basically, the central idea of logical positivism was that you should not use that everything unobservable is actually a stand-in for observable things. So in economics, the same idea was used to say that, well, preferences of my heart, these are unobservable. What I like or what I don't like, that I don't know, but I can see choices. So now the simple point is that choices are different from preferences. If I give you two fruits, like the rambutan and the akji, these are two different fruits which you have never tasted, and I say, okay, choose between them. So you will make a choice. But that choice will not reveal your preference because you don't know anything about these fruits. So preferences are different from choice. But logical positivism said that no, there's no unobservables. So then the preference and the choice were made to be equal. And this is a major mistake. And it was discovered in later in the history of philosophy of science. People realized that you cannot equalize the unobservable to the unobservable, to the observable. Gravity is not the same as an elliptical orbit, and so on. So basically, logical positivism collapsed. The philosophy was rejected by philosophers. But all of social science was constructed, modern social was constructed in early 20th century, especially economics, and it was based on positivist ideas. Previously, before in 1930s, Lionel Robbins created a new foundation for economics, which is the scarcity foundation, which we all know. Before that, economics was about welfare. How can we provide things to people to improve welfare? But Lionel Robbins said that welfare is something which is unmeasurable. It's unscientific. So basically then there was a distinction between wants and needs. What I need is bread and food and healthcare. These things are important. If I want to listen to music, that's not an important thing. That will not cause. But what Robin said is that there is no distinction. Wants and needs are the same because the distinction is unobservable. So only thing we can see is choice. Now, if I choose to listen to music, then that improves my utility. And if I choose to have bread, that also improves my utility. And there's no distinction between the two. So the job of the economist became to satisfy all wants and needs, regardless of where they come from. Now, there are two things. This job is impossible to fulfill because wants keep expanding and this is what the Quran says, that if you give a man one valley of gold, he will want for another. And this is exactly what happens in reality. So the economist set himself an impossible job. Also, he set himself a haram job because the um, Quran says that don't fulfill your desires. Quran encourages us to fulfill our basic needs. It says eat, drink, wear good clothing. That's not a problem. But do not fulfill your idle desires. So if economist says my job is to fulfill everybody's desire and not ask about where this desire came from, then this is haram, not permissible. So this logical positivism led to drastically wrong ideas about human welfare. Human welfare, according to economists, is to just satisfy their desires. But the Quran says that no, human welfare is fulfilled by fulfilling their needs. If you give a man to eat, that improves his welfare. But if you just fulfill his idle desires, that's actually opposite. It makes him rebellious. It actually harms him. So he should exercise as a discipline. He should not chase after his idle desires. So these were three major mistakes that were made in methodology. So why are we reviewing Western methodological mistakes? It's not just that these are mistakes, but actually these are existing. And once we understand these, then in the light of this, we can make much better theories. So I've covered these slides already, but basically, in terms of making better theories, we need to incorporate morality, fairness, justice into a theory. If we want to have an economic theory, we cannot do it without ethics. And I've shown this in several different papers, that regardless of what you do, you automatically include value judgments. So if you say that the Pareto optimality principle I will take to judge welfare, then you are saying that property values are sacred and right to live is not. So you say that if somebody is hungry and the other person has $1 million, you say, I can't take away his money and feed the other person because it will reduce his utility and it will increase his, and there's no interpersonal comparison of utility. So I don't know whether or not this is a good move. But if I say that no, hunger takes priority over property rights, and this is what the Quran says, then I can say that yes, feeding the hungry is good, and he has excess money, he has more than he needs, so there is no harm to him from taking away because his needs are fulfilled. And if he cannot fulfill his wants, that's not relevant. So according to Islam, if you take the needs as primary and take the wants as secondary, then our first job is to fulfill all the needs. And even if this is at the cost of not allowing other people to fulfill their wants, this is perfectly legitimate and permissible and just and required of us. So we need morality in order to do economics. Economics used to be a branch of moral philosophy in the Europe also, before they made these methodological mistakes. And now, despite the fact that they claim that economics is not a positive subject. It is actually a normative subject, and it makes very, very bad value judgments. It says that human beings should be selfish and greedy, and this is good for them, and this is good for society also. And all of these things are completely wrong. So that's one thing. Now, one important issue here is that suppose that Europeans agree, and some of them do, that we do need to incorporate morality and ethics. Then they are faced with a real dilemma. What is morality? They don't have an answer to this question, because they have basically developed two major schools of thought about morality. One school of thought is utilitarian, that morality is whatever makes you happy. Now, this was actually developed as it was called the religion of humanity by Bentham, and Bentham was thought of himself as a prophet of a new religion. And basically, utility theory comes from Bentham, and it's a new religion. It says that what is good, what is moral, is what makes you happy. And from once you take this position, then all of the things that the economists are saying start to make sense. That yes, if I kill another person and it makes me happy, then this is good for me, and this is a utility increasing. And so you see all of these random shootings. If it makes me happy to shoot up 50 people, then who's to prevent me? And if it makes us happy as a society to burn 5 million Jews in ovens, children, women, everybody, then fine, do it. This will maximize our utility. So there is no morality other than what makes you happy. So that's one school of thought, and it's seriously problematic in real world. That is, if you look at, if you exclude Islamic point of view and say that, okay, let's think about happiness only. Let's suppose that I die and I will turn into dust. Even then, it turns out that short-term maximization of pleasure is not the route to happiness. The route to happiness, in the long term, it's just like I've explained many times, that drinking Coca-Cola will make you happy and thirsty, but that's not the formula for living a happy life. So that they are also discovering this. So the utilitarian theory does not provide us with a good guide even to human happiness on this earthly life. And if you take the larger picture into view, then definitely it's a very bad, dangerous, harmful, and misleading theory. And some people have recognized this. Article I keep referring to, Julie Nelson, Poisoning the Well. She says that if you take economic theory seriously, it poisons your moral imagination, your ideas about how morality should be. So so the West cannot really construct, although there are currently existing philosophers. Peter Singer is one of the major utilitarian philosophers who tries to derive morality from the idea of happiness. But it's very difficult to do, basically, because what happens is that you need to consider the happiness of others. But then the fundamental dilemma, and if you do that, then you can construct a reasonable theory of morality on the basis of utility. If you say that not just my happiness, but the happiness of everybody matters. But then the question is, why should I be responsible? Why should I care if everybody else is unhappy as long as I am happy? So how can I convince somebody who's a utilitarian that you should not care only about your own happiness, you should care about the happiness of everybody else? Where am I going to get this logic from? That's a serious problem. The second way to construct morality is by consensus. If all of us agree that such and such thing is moral, then it becomes moral. This consensus is implemented by the state. It passes a law saying that this is now moral from now on, and now everybody who violates this rule of morality will be put into jail. So the problem with that is that it is completely unstable, as I have described earlier, that in 70s when I went to the USA, homosexuality was immoral. People did not like it. If somebody did it, he would be very embarrassed and shamed in the public. It was a crime. It was a psychological disease listed in the manual of diseases, and it required therapy. Now, in the 1990s, the social consensus has changed. It is a normal behavior. If somebody says something against it, that is a crime, and he can be imprisoned for it. And now the homosexuals are allowed to marry each other. And if somebody, clerk, refused to, Christian clerk said that I don't want to do this, this is immoral, she was put into jail. So, so now morality by consensus means that anything goes. So, so West is stuck. They cannot introduce a morality because they have no basis, no access to morality anymore. So, if we want to construct an Islamic economics, the Islam gives us ethics and morality directly without any our need to consider these issues. So, we can construct economics based on moral considerations. The second major mistake was the Battle of Methodologies, in which economics forgot history because economics started to look for universal laws of behavior. And so they said, well, we don't want, and suppose I want to study the economics of the 20th century. So I will say, okay, there was the in 1914 there was World War One that had a major impact on the European economies. Basically, Europe was the leader of the world at that time. They had the richest economy. America was, although very strong and powerful and wealthy, it was still backward. It was not the world leader. Great Britain was, but the World War One, it destroyed European economies, and America became very rich. It actually made loans and sales to both sides of the battle for a while before taking sides with Britain. It led to the victory of Britain, and then it initiated the Marshall Plan, which gave a lot of money to rebuild Europe and so on. And it became the world leader at that time. And then there was World War II, which had another major impact on the economies, and so on and so forth. The problem is, none of you, all of you have studied economics. None of you have studied this. Why? Because this is not science. A science is about a universal law. It's about the law of gravity. It must hold for all times and all periods, and it must hold for all cultures. So you want to find a law of human behavior, which is true in Brazil in 16th century, and in India in 19th century, and in Europe in 21st century. And this should be the same law. So the supply and demand theory is supposed to be such a law. Now you study the theory of trade, you study mathematical equations. So how can there is no such law? It doesn't exist. This is an imaginary object. So how do economists achieve this? Well, they say, let's study an imaginary world. In this imaginary world, there are no real human beings. There are only these robots, which are called Homo economicus, and they behave according to mathematical formula. So they say, okay, all right, so suppose that I was to introduce a tax into this imaginary world. How would these Homo economicus behave? This is what the mathematical formula. So I can calculate how they will behave because they are robots. They are not human beings. So my formulas show that in the ultimatum game, the robot will offer $9. Will take $9 out of 10, and he will offer $1 to the other robot. And the other robot will accept, and maybe this will be true. So then the economist says that from this model, I conclude that this is how human beings will behave, and then he is mistaken. This is not what happens in the real world. So this idea that we can have universal invariant laws of behavior, this is completely wrong, and this is exactly at the heart of modern economic theory. And this is how economists work today. So now, how can we improve economic theory? Well, we can do so by taking into account history. We can take into account human behavior. We can uh, one school of thought which was destroyed by this scientific methodology was the institutional economists. The institutional economists uh, had institutions like banks and insurance. These are all local historical things, and you have to study how the bank functions. You cannot, if the banking law in Germany is different, then the economics of Germany will be different today, and if the banking law changes, then it will have an effect on the economy. So all of the things that structure our and are local and historical and temporal, and they change with time, these things you have to take into account. So the theory of trade that is currently taught in Harvard in the PhD course, uh, according to this theory, the trade between Pakistan and India is governed by the same set of laws as the laws as the trade between Germany and Brazil, and the same laws govern the trade between Nigeria and Botswana. And this is not true. If I want to study the trade of Pakistan and India, I have to look at locally what is produced and what are the many different things which are just very special and confined to, and if I understand the 21st century and things which are happening today, I have to look at. I cannot make mathematical formulas, but the way that students do mathematics is they study mathematical formulas in a book. Suppose I want to prove the theory of comparative advantage. I want to prove that trade between Pakistan and India is beneficial for both countries. Now, this is a real world proposition. I would think, and if I wasn't brainwashed by economics, that in order to answer whether or not this is true, I would have to look at what India is, what Pakistan is, what are the commodities they will trade, who will benefit. But economics theory says no. All you need to do is to draw some production possibility frontiers and draw some lines, and voila, without knowing anything about India and without knowing anything about Pakistan, you can prove that trade will be beneficial for both countries. This is completely ridiculous, but this is the consequence of forgetting history. The third major methodological mistake was logical positivism. Basically, positivism is a complex philosophy, but it reduces to the idea that observable and quantifiable things matter, and unobservable and unquantifiable things don't. And there have been many massively damaging consequences of this. So basically, the I will just give one example, but it's all there are so many. So, for example, today the world is being driven by, and this is very strong, that we want to introduce KPIs, key performance indicators. We want to measure performance. So now people have a qualitative idea about who is doing good research and who is doing bad research. Well, qualitative is not science. It is not measurable. It's an unobservable quantity. So how can we convert it into an observable number? We just count the number of articles. So we start doing that, and then what happens is that um, people start publishing articles, and this has actually happened in Pakistan as a result that there are good journals and bad journals, and very low quality journals which happen to be on the list of the journals which count. So over the past 10 years, people have published massively in these articles which are very poor quality journals because they get a high count. And now these people, they get promotions and they get pay raises because according to the KPI, their performance is very good. The police were told that however many challans that you write, we are going to count that, and that's going to be your performance indicator. So they started issuing challans to innocents in order to improve their quality of performance. So this idea that you can measure the quality and there is a particular number and that you have to quantify, which comes from any emphasizing observables, has led to a lot of damage. Today, still, people don't understand what the problem with KPIs. Now, the thing is that there is a genuine problem. I mean, if you have something unobservable, how are you going to measure? Different people will have different opinions, and there is a problem. But solving that problem, well, the KPI can help you. It's not that count is irrelevant, but it is not the only thing. You have to keep, yani, you have to keep both of the things in the picture. There is an unobservable, there is an indicator. The two are different. There is a reality, yani there is a preference which is in the heart. There is a choice. There is a correspondence between them, but the two are different. So what positivism does is to eliminate the real, and that is really the source of blindness. That okay, there is some value to KPI. You can use it, but if you abuse it, then you get into trouble, and that's what happens. So I think what I would like to do is to stop this here and to take the just because